Hello, book lovers, and welcome back or welcome to Natcat's Bookish Cafe. Today we are here to do a very short June wrap up. Alright guys, it is the last day of June and I know I'm not going to be finishing anything else, so we are going to go ahead and go through the 4 books that I managed to read this month. It was a rough reading month. Quality wise, it wasn't too terrible. I did unfortunately have another 2.5, but other than that, we had a couple 4s and a 5-star, but quantity wise it just wasn't happening. I believe I've mentioned a few times that I'm slumping. It kind of started in the beginning of May and has been gradually getting worse. A couple weeks ago I did hit kind of what's called a burnout wall, where you just like you've been in burnout and you've reached the point where you can't get any more burned out and it's just no longer possible for you to pretend like you aren't burned out. And unfortunately, I've just had a lot of stuff going on in my life, both things that I actively want to be doing, a lot of social obligations that I've been having a really great time with, but also a lot of planning when it comes to trips. I'm also currently home alone due to the fact that my parents are in Iceland, and it is always kind of stressful for me to be home alone for multiple reasons. One of them kind of being the fact that I am used to living in a household of 3 and suddenly it is on me to kind of keep the household running. And obviously I keep trying to tell myself like, hey, the house isn't going to look the way that it does when there's 3 people doing what needs to be done. But at the same time, I do kind of have a few more obligations in my day-to-day life than I would if my parents were here as well. So I haven't really had the opportunity to rest and get over that burnout. And so I am someone who, when I'm stressed, when I'm anxious, when I'm tired, I can't read a lot. There are some people when they're anxious, like they can read a ton, they want to escape reality. I want to escape reality too, but unfortunately my brain is like, we're anxious, we're not going to do anything but doom scroll. Where's the logic in that? It isn't there, so don't look for it. I'm hoping that in the second half of July I will be traveling to Italy for a couple weeks, that I will just finally be able to like actually relax and decompress, and hopefully when I come into August we will be fully over this slump, and maybe we'll even be over the slump in the month of July. But that being said, we are reviewing a month where I just didn't have the mental capacity to read a lot, so we are going to go ahead and review those 4 books. Before we jump into those 4 books though, let's go ahead and take a look at my basic stats. Like I said, only 4 books read, meaning that I only read a total of 627 pages. So yeah, the books that I did read, these weren't 500 plus page books. They were like normal to short books. I did end up listening to 1 audiobook this month, so I listened to a total of 9.5 hours of audiobooks. My average rating wasn't too terrible. It was unfortunately under a 4-star, probably because of that one 2.5 star that I gave out, so the average came to a 3.88. For those who are new to my channel, the way that I review my books is I start with my least favorite or the lowest rated and move up to my most favorite or highest rated books. We luckily had no DNFs this month, which might seem surprising. I did start a lot of books and have temporarily put them down just because of my reading slump. However, I haven't permanently DNF'd anything. All right, so starting with the book I rated 2.5 stars, it was actually a nonfiction book, and that is Flamboyance, The Queer Harlem Renaissance I Wish I'd Known by George M. Johnson. This is illustrated by Charlie Palmer. I will say I often don't rate nonfiction books unless I give them 5 stars. However, I felt like this one was more focused on like historical figures, and so I didn't feel so bad rating it. Like if it was like a memoir, then maybe I wouldn't have rated it, but I do feel comfortable rating the story. This, once again, this is the author of All Boys Aren't Blue. I should know, it's on my shelf. Yes, All Boys Aren't Blue, and I read that quite a few years ago, and I do remember enjoying it. I mean, I still have it on my shelf and everything, but this book, unfortunately, there was quite a few things that didn't work for me. Essentially, in this book, George is talking about different prominent figures throughout the Harlem Renaissance who are part of the Black community, but also part of the queer community. And all throughout this, we also get Charlie's art. So let me find a picture. All right, so the art is absolutely stunning. I would say the art was my favorite part of this book. It was maybe even the saving grace of the story. I think the formatting did not work for me. It was almost like George didn't 100% know what they wanted to do with this story. Essentially, each person would get maybe like 5 to 7 pages of text kind of talking about what they did and why they were important to the Harlem Renaissance. But George would also kind of put in how this person impacted them, or what they liked about this person, or what they thought was interesting about this person. And there was a part of me that was kind of like, you have just these few pages to talk about these characters, and I don't feel like we should have spent any of that time being like, how does George feel about them? Because George already has their memoirs, like I mentioned earlier. So I was kind of annoyed by how much they were talking about their feelings in this book. And I also felt like I learned so little about these characters. Like every time I left a character to move on to the next, I was like, I'm not gonna remember this character. Like I felt like I didn't really learn anything memorable about them. I didn't spend enough time with them. I felt like the author didn't spend enough time talking about their work. You know, there was a part of me that wished that they had included more quotes, because a lot of these were singers and poets and authors, and I was like, put more quotes into the story so you can be like, oh my god, I recognize that quote, or that was a really beautiful quote and it was this person who wrote it. But everything felt very surface level in this book. This is like if you had to do a project on a person who was famous during the Harlem Renaissance, you could read this to kind of get like just a sample, and then you would have to go off and learn more about that person, because you're really not gonna get much here. So honestly, this left me relatively disappointed. And I also kind of struggled with George's writing style. And they actually mentioned how people sometimes say that they like their writing style because it feels like you're having a casual conversation with someone, which in certain scenarios I think can work. Like in their memoir, you know, you're talking about them, they're talking about themselves and everything, and so that more casual writing style works. But when you're talking about people who are in the arts, people who spent their life writing and singing and dancing and just spreading all this beauty, there's a part of me that feels like the writing should be a little bit more. I just feel like people who did beautiful things deserve beautiful writing to honor what they did. That's just a personal preference where I felt like the writing style didn't quite match up with the topic. So yes, unfortunately didn't have a great time with this nonfiction, but I am glad that I was able to go ahead and read it during Pride Month. It is always important to emphasize that queer people have always been here, that they have played a big role in society. And so I do appreciate books like this. It just personally didn't work for me. All right, up next I had two 4-star reads. The first one being the one audiobook I actually managed to finish this month, and that is The Lesbiana's Guide to Catholic School by Sonora Reyes. And this is a YA contemporary story. I've heard nothing but good things about this book, and honestly, it did not disappoint. So in this book, we are following Yamilet, who is a high school student. I'm honestly trying to remember if she was a senior or a junior. No, she was definitely not a senior. She might have been a junior. And she and her brother are moving to a private Catholic high school. The reason they are doing this is because her brother has been getting into a lot of fights at their other school, and they are hoping that putting him in a new environment will kind of help him out a little bit. She is more than happy to go ahead and leave her old school because she confessed her feelings to a longtime friend of hers, and this friend reacted very badly to her being a lesbian and kind of made Yamilet almost feel like a predator because she was like, oh, you should have told me that you were a lesbian so that, I could have not hung out with you, where suddenly Yamilet was like, well, our friendship meant a lot. I wasn't just hanging out with you because I'm like sexually interested with you. That's not what this is. But that was kind of how her friend made her feel, and so she wants to kind of leave that situation behind, but she also doesn't want a repeat of it. So she is going into the school as a straight girl. So she's going back into the closet ish. She never really came out like her brother, her mother, most of her community does not know that she is queer, but throughout the story, we kind of see her experience as she is struggling to be in the closet. She is also starting to develop a fellow classmate called Bo, who is the only girl that's really out as queer at this primarily straight, primarily white school that they are attending. This book focuses a lot on family dynamics, like her experience as a older daughter in a Hispanic household where she is often blamed for anything that might go wrong. She is expected to care for her brother, and if anything bad happens to her brother, even if she has nothing to do with it, the blame is kind of put on her. Her father was deported some time ago, so she is living just with her mother and brother and is trying to keep her relationship with her father alive and well, even though he is many miles away. On top of that, she is dealing with some racism at the school. She is also trying to handle the fact that there is homophobia present without outing herself, and it can be a bit of a difficult read because you definitely see someone who's kind of taking a lot of shit and she's not really standing up for herself, and you can definitely tell that it's having a negative impact on her. And you can also tell that she has a lot of insecurities because of the way that other people perceive her. I really enjoyed her relationship with her brother. That was definitely my favorite part of the story. I don't want to give any spoilers about, how their relationship develops, but it was very heartwarming. It was very difficult to read. There is a second book in this series that follows her brother. He has pretty severe depression, so trigger warnings for talks of like suicide attempts in this story. But even though she feels a lot of pressure from her mother to care for her brother, and sometimes she resents him a little bit for that, she at the end of the day is a big sister who adores and loves her brother and thinks the world of him and just wants what's best for him. And throughout the story, we see how much he loves her as well. This book overall really made me happy, despite the fact that it dealt with some pretty heavy topics. I do think that the author did a good job of handling them, that she balanced it all out well with like the darker real moments along with more the moments of humor and friendship and self-growth. All of that was done really well. The reason it didn't get higher than a 4-star is because her relationship with Bo, I don't think I really started to feel like the two of them were a good match until the last 20% of the book. So I felt like it took too long for me to really feel like the two of them were a match. I kind of felt like their relationship felt forced in the whole, oh, I'm a queer person and this is the only openly queer person, so obviously I'm going to be with them, because it kind of felt like, well, that's my only option kind of situation. And so it didn't feel as like natural, like we are choosing each other out of everyone. It was kind of like, well, who else am I gonna choose kind of situation. So that is how I felt for the majority of the story when it came to their relationship. But in the last 20% of the story, the relationship really did grow on me. I just wish it had done so a little bit earlier on in the story. I will also say that Bo isn't my favorite type of character. Her behavior was just not, I don't really know how to explain it. It just isn't the kind of behavior that I often click with. And so obviously, since I didn't love her as a character, I also didn't love her as a love interest. So honestly, my main concern with the story was the relationship and Bo as a character. No offense to Bo, you know, she won me over in the end, but overall a great read, and I'm glad that I finally read it after all this time. The second 4-star read was a book that I bought on my Kindle. This was an author that I had read for the first time a couple months ago. I can't remember exactly when I read their books, but this is Blood Orange by Mars Adler, and they are the author of The Apples of New Eden, which was a book I really enjoyed. That was more sci-fi horror based. This is more fantasy horror based, once again with more erotic elements to it. They write stories that are a little bit shorter, and this book just came out. So when I saw that it came out, I was like, you know what? I want to go ahead and read that. And considering I was slumping, I will give in to any of my brain's desires if it means that I'm reading something. And I ended up having a really good time with this story. In this book, we are following a trans man who is currently in university. They are a art major. They do sculptures out of clay, and they get extra money by delivering groceries and doing yard work for some of the more elderly people in their old neighborhood. They used to live in a low income area that had low income housing. However, that area ended up getting torn down because a wealthy family wanted to build a suburban area there, and our character's family was forced to move somewhere they couldn't really afford to live, and so that added financial strain to them. And our character has always had beef with this wealthy family because the suburban area never actually got built because they kind of ran out of money. So they tore down all these trees and kind of destroyed the area, and the low income housing sent all these poor families like somewhere else and then didn't even complete the task. And so one day he realizes that the daughter of the man who started this project is back, and she's like, I'm gonna finish this project. And our character is like, no, you're not. No, you're not. F you and F your family. And so he goes to the land. He picks up a rock. He's like, I'm going to smash the windows of the house she is living in. I will scare her away. And then he is approached by this person, this very beautiful being who does not have a gender. This person is non-binary, and they are like, well, that's not going to work because I've already tried that, and so I need your help to chase these people off of my land permanently. And our character is like, yeah, I would do anything for you. Who are you? And it seems like he and this person might have a past together that our character doesn't really 100% remember. And so essentially we kind of follow him trying to fulfill this task that this other being, which is like a fae-like being, has set for him, while simultaneously just like having their thoughts consumed by both their lust for this being, but also the rage that they feel for this family that has destroyed the land as well as the lives of so many people who had previously lived on it. So I thought that this was a very interesting book when it came to themes. Thematically, it focused a lot, obviously, on the destruction of nature, the fact that humans are constantly tearing down trees to build these sprawling suburbias. I, here in Washington in the Lacey Olympia area, see new neighborhoods popping up all the time, hundreds upon hundreds of buildings every year, trees being felled left and right. Trust me, I know. And it also balances like this, hey, wealthy people and their greed are negatively impacting the environment, with wealthy people and their greed is negatively impacting the people who are in poverty. So it's not just nature, it's just showing how much the whims of those in power negatively impact those and that around them. So I thought it was an interesting concept. Once again, I really enjoyed the writing. I enjoy the erotic scenes that the author writes. They aren't over the top and they don't like overrun the story or anything. For me, when it comes to stuff like that, I always need a bit of a balance. The only reason I gave it just a 4-star is because it is a slower paced story, and so it doesn't actually have like a huge plot to it. It really is more about the character and their feelings and the themes that the author is trying to express. I do think that this is a story that if I read it again, I could definitely get more out of it. So once again, really excited that I discovered this author this year and looking forward to reading some of the stuff they posted in the past, as well as seeing what else they come out with. All right, guys, and on to our final book and the 1 5-star of the month. That is going to be Icarus by K. Enkrum. This I read as a buddy read with my friend online, and I am so glad that we were able to read this together. One, because I have been thinking about this book for a while. I originally heard about this book from Mina. Is it Mina Reads? She had read this book and absolutely adored it. And then my friend had gotten a special edition of it and was like, do you want to read it together? And I was like, well, it's Pride Month, so this is a queer book. Yes, I will love to read it. And this story was so interesting and so beautifully written that it was just wonderful to have someone to gush over it with while I was reading it. So in this book, we are following Icarus, and he is a high school senior, and he has been living a life as a thief. His father is someone who replicates essentially perfectly old art. Oftentimes, like on the legal side, museums or private collectors will send him pieces and he will fix any damage to the art and then send it back so it can be displayed. However, his father has beef with this one wealthy man, and he sends his son in there to take pictures of the art that this man has collected. Then he himself will replicate that drawing exactly in the condition that it is. You know, he will tear the paper, he will burn the paper, he will scribble on it with crayon if he needs to, and then his son will take that replica and replace it and steal the real painting. And they have been doing this for years. And at the beginning of this book, for the first time, Icarus is caught by someone who is not supposed to be in the home. And that is Helios, this man's son who is under house arrest. And this boy says, I will not tell my father that you are here, but I would like you to return and spend time with me. And so the relationship between these two boys starts to bloom. Okay, so I just finished filming like me babbling about this book, and I just feel like it was so all over the place that I'm just gonna read what I wrote on my Goodreads, which I usually don't do, but I just feel like I have so much to say about this book, and right now my brain is just not able to articulate it. So we're gonna go ahead and go to past Natalie and let her do it for us. The writing in this book was beautiful. The author's descriptions were lyrical and yet not overly flowery. There was beauty in the simplicity. I need to buy this book so I can reread and annotate it. I have since bought it. It is on its way to me from a Pango order. Icarus was such an interesting character. Not what I expected, yet so much more. He was a kid who spoke like a poet, who craved love and friendship, but lived a life where he couldn't have either. He toed the line of the life he wanted and the life he had to live. He was beyond his years, but honestly, almost everyone in this book was. Like, who are these teens and why didn't I go to school with them? I loved Icarus's development throughout the story. This was a boy learning to put himself first, learning to be a little selfish, learning to be bold. Helios was also an interesting character, a boy trapped by a father who abuses him. He was also a dancer and was quick to fall in love with Icarus, and both boys quickly devote themselves to each other. Their love story was beautiful, intense, and frightening at times. The pacing in the book worked well for me and had a good build-up. Plenty of time to develop relationships and characters, and the end was climactic, though maybe a smidge on the abrupt side, but still filled with hope for a better future. The book had so many scenes that had me enraptured. Icarus is touch-starved, and the author's ability to write sensual scenes was a bit mind-boggling. All right, so as you can see, even though my burnout addled brain cannot articulate how I feel about this book, it is a 5-star read. It is one I'm very excited to have on my shelves to one day reread, to really slowly absorb each and every word this author has to say and to highlight all those beautiful quotes. This book does obviously deal with some heavy themes. I mentioned a little bit that one of our characters is facing abuse at the hand of their father. Technically, both of the characters are being emotionally abused by their fathers. You could very much say that Icarus is being neglected by his father. Helios is both being physically as well as emotionally abused by his father. So those are things that are occurring throughout this book. We also have Helios as an intersex character, so there is that representation in there, and there is some other stuff going on with him from his past that I'm not going to talk about, but I'm sure that if you look up trigger warnings, it'll be listed in there so you can decide for yourself if that is something that you want to read. But overall, the relationships in here were absolutely stunning. Writing was stunning, and I am so happy that I read it this month and can claim at least 1 5-star during Pride Month. All right, guys, so those are the... Oh my god, I think I forgot a book. Why am I just now remembering? Okay, guys, so I did actually forget a book. Whenever I do my wrap-ups, I look at my spreadsheet, and it seems that I never updated the fact that I read this book. So in case you're wondering the state of my mind, I am forgetting the books that I read in a month where I only read 5 books. Can't even remember 5 measly books that I read in the last month. But that being said, I guess we have one more book to talk about. Now this was an audio book that I listened to, so you can add an additional 11 hours on to that 9.5 that I mentioned earlier. And I ended up giving this book 4.5 stars, which actually brings up my average rating for the month to a solid 4 stars. So excited to say that. And this was actually the second book in a duology, and that is The Brightness Between Us. This is by Elliot Schrieffer, and it is the sequel to The Darkness Between Us. Now, I can tell you very little about this book, other than it is a young adult sci-fi story. The first book has a pretty massive twist in the middle of it, so talking about anything that is happening in the second book could definitely be considered spoilery, so I'm gonna be very vague. At the beginning of the series, we are following two young men who are waking up on a spaceship, and they had originally thought that they would be the only ones on the spaceship. However, they find that that is not the case, that their country has actually partnered with their enemy in order to increase the success of this mission. So that being said, throughout the first book, we follow these two characters as they are kind of getting accustomed to what needs to be done for this mission, as well as the fact that they are having to work with someone who is technically from an enemy nation. Now, in this book, we are following these characters again, along with two other new characters, and we are actually following two different timelines. One of the timelines takes place quite a few years after the first book, and the second timeline technically takes place before the beginning of the first book, and kind of talks about certain events that led to situations in the first book. You're like, wow, great, Natalie, I know what you're talking about, and now I want to read that book. I'm sorry, this is just like, this author is so good at taking stories in a direction that you never expected them to go, that you just can't really say anything about them because you don't want to take away from someone's reading experience and their ability to experience those plot twists for the first time. And so I'm just trying to be like very vague, but I feel like that's just making it a little bit messy and muddy. But to simplify it, these are really interesting sci-fi stories. I really do think that the author has some really fun ideas. I will say I don't read a ton of sci-fi, so maybe for me it is easy to be impressed by things that I haven't read a lot of, but I definitely think that if you're looking to get into the sci-fi genre, this is a good place to be, because I never really feel lost, and that's coming from someone who can definitely feel lost during a sci-fi read. I think the pacing of the stories worked really well. Like I said, we are following two different timelines, and we are actually following from like multiple characters' points of view, and there was never a time where I was like, oh great, now we're going to this timeline, or oh great, now we're with that character, which, you know, there are plenty of stories where we experience that, but this wasn't one of them. All the characters were very interesting. Everything that they were doing was worth reading about. So I think if you're looking for kind of an interesting, fast-paced story, that this will really work for you. I will say that considering the current state of the world, if you are a little nervous about reading about society at the brink of collapse, I will say in the first book, they are on this mission because humanity is running out of time and they need to find a new place to live. So obviously in that timeline that takes place before they leave on their mission, we are following them in a society that is on the brink of collapse. There's a lot of war, there's a lot of threat of nuclear war and things like that being discussed, and I understand that at a time like this, that might not be something that you want to read about, so I just wanted to go ahead and throw that out there. But like I said, I gave this 4.5 stars. This book really took me by surprise. I mean, I knew I would like it because I liked the first book, but the directions that it went was it was just really fun and really interesting. So yes, I can't believe that I forgot that I read that book. So yes, that is the last book. And that is the end of my June wrap up. So 5 books, that's a little bit better than 4, considering 5 was what I read in January. So it's technically no longer the lowest reading month of the year. It's just tied for being the lowest reading month of the year. I would love to know how your guys' reading month went. Hopefully better than mine. I hope you guys are not slumping. I hope you guys aren't too stressed or burned out. I hope life is going well for you. I will say, outside of reading, a lot of great things have happened to me, you know, but it's just a lot at one time. I need some downtime, and I will get that soon. So hopefully that'll be reflected in my future reading. Let me know what your least favorite and favorite book of the month were as well. Obviously, my least favorite was going to be the nonfiction Flamboyance, and my favorite is going to be Icarus by Kay Ancrum. So the 2 physical books that I read this month. As always, guys, thank you so much for supporting my channel by watching my videos, and I hope to see you next time. Bye!